Welcome to the Wild Ag Podcast, where we'll serve as a connection point for landowners and conservation professionals who want to integrate conservation and agriculture. I'm Dr. Andrew Little, Professor of Landscape Ecology and Habitat Management and Extension Specialist at the University of Nebraska.
And I'm Nate Pfluger, Precision Ag Coordinator for Pheasants Forever and an avid outdoorsman with friends and family in my free time. Together, we'll work to bring you perspectives from both landowners and conservation professionals for discussions on soil, water, and wildlife in ag-dominated landscapes. Welcome back to the Wild Ag Podcast. I'm Nate Pfluger, joined by my co-host, Dr. Andy Little. And today we have the privilege of being joined by Dr. Nathan Mueller, and we are actually going to discuss winter wheat and all things winter wheat and really drill down on why this should be or could be a viable third crop for corn and soybean producers. So with that, I will kick it over to Nathan Mueller to introduce himself, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, thanks for the invite. Happy to be on with both of you today and working with you in the past on some things. So I'm Nathan Mueller. I'm the Executive Director for New Horizon Genetics. New Horizon Genetics is really the brand of University of Nebraska small grains breeding program. So essentially my role is to work with the small grains breeder, Catherine Frells, to help with the marketing, outreach, and promotion of the varieties that she releases. And we have several other partners in there between her and I. We also work with New Tech Ventures, which is the intellectual property arm of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. So all the varieties go through there, and they have their protected varieties. And so there's royalties that I work to really work with our certified growers to collect those royalties. And then we also work with Husker Genetics, which is essentially foundation seeds. So that really goes from Catherine in the breeding program to we have to increase that seed from small amounts to large enough to give to our up to 18 members. So that's up at the Eastern Nebraska Research Education Extension Center up near Meade. And then from there, it goes to our affiliate members. And those affiliate members essentially are, again, increasing that seed and then selling that as certified seed to farmers across Nebraska, Colorado, and Kansas is most of our market. And then we work closely with the Nebraska Wheat Board because they're also a funding partner, both of the Small Grains Breeding Program and New Horizon Genetics. So it's a fun group to work with and interact with. We've recently had a conference called the Nebraska Seed Improvement Conference, which is the Nebraska Crop Improvement Conference, which is also located in plant sciences here on East Campus. So lots of university connections in my role, but New Horizon Genetics is actually a 501c5 nonprofit organization, which is very similar structure to Kansas State Small Grain Breeding Program and Kansas Wheat Alliance. So similar structure to kind of just like you would have a brand, a Bayer might have a brand, Westbred, University of Nebraska has their brand, which is New Horizon Genetics.
That's super cool.
And so in your current role, you mentioned marketing and sales, but you've really kind of seen all aspects of the small grain industry, right? Because you've been on the research side yourself, and then you're also a grower of small grains, correct?
Yeah, so I've worn a lot of hats in the past. So I grew up here in Nebraska on a dairy farm with corn, soybean, alfalfa, and oats. So, fairly diverse in the landscape that we sit in today, but really had a passion for small grains. Actually did my PhD at K-State, started working with it there, and then was the cropping systems extension specialist or professor up at South Dakota State. And I ran the variety trials and was in charge of cropping systems or, diverse crop rotations. And so that's where I really found a place in wheat, and then happened to move back home and work for University of Nebraska Extension for 10 years here in Eastern Nebraska. And, there's a lot of players in the corn and soybean space, but a place that I found home was encouraging where small grain fits in the rotation and some of the benefits that small grains still has in our rotation that's predominantly corn soybeans.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
And I definitely want to touch on that a little later in our conversation. But let's jump off into the history of winter wheat. What was kind of the heyday, I guess? When did we see the most acres out on the landscape? And maybe not only in Nebraska, but the Midwest in general.
Yeah, so I would say, production in Nebraska already started in the 1860s for wheat. So it's probably one of our longest standing crops in the state. It's something that people literally brought with them from portions of Asia and Europe. And then there's been lots of breeding efforts at University of Nebraska and private industry and other land grants. And so it really ramped up from those 1800s and probably peaked really between the 1930s through the 1950s was kind of its heyday. And then from 1950 on, a big thing came into play, soybeans. Soybeans was introduced, really took off, and it's been increasing really since the 1950s till now. Corn acres has always been a staple of Nebraska as well, with being the Cornhusker state, well fit. But really, if you look at all crops across the U.S., soybeans has had the biggest increase in that time frame, and even corn, though acres were up and then back down, they've been increasing for probably 50 years now. So corn and soybeans have been increasing, and literally almost every other grain commodity crop has decreased really since the 1970s till now. So that from anywhere from cotton to oats to grain sorghum. So really seeing a shift in acres and what crops are grown on. There's acres across the United States.
Yeah, Larkin Powell has a paper and kind of illustrates him and Tim Hiller kind of the crop diversity in the landscape. And to your point about the 50s and even to the 60s time period, that was kind of like the inflection point where you started to see. So you had the highest crop diversity around that time, and then since then it's just been kind of a precipitous decline in the crop diversity. And then you look and you mirror that with the inverse relationship of corn and soybeans have just been increasing over time.
And I think another factor in there that we often don't think about is just development of irrigation.
Oh, sure.
And the center pivot. And so really, if you look at historical irrigation acres, that also started really ramping up from the 1950s till now. And that I think had a huge factor in Nebraska, maybe more so than other states, just because we're number 2 in irrigation with almost 8 million acres.
Yeah.
And just what we can talk about water use of corn, soybean, wheat, but having irrigation, it changes the game on what you have for water resources for the crop that you want to grow.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Well, I'm just thinking about the technology and changes through that time as you're alluding to. Just things, especially now in the today of kind of precision ag technology, how much that's really changed the game for ag production systems. And think about where's it going to be at in 20, 30 years from now as we automate a lot of these things. So,
Yeah, and you talked about the decline in wheat acres over the history. And we also see a decline in wildlife numbers, specifically game birds in areas that lost the winter wheat production as well. So just something to plug in there. Within my current role, I try to get producers to diversify their crop rotations. So bring that winter wheat back into the rotation. Some of those conversations that I have, producers say that the yields aren't there. And past conversations with you, we have always been actively working with winter wheat genetics, trying to increase yields. So where were the historic yields at? And then where are our yields at today?
Yeah. So we can start at the Nebraska level, and then we can even zoom into specifically the eastern part of the state for where we sit for yield. So really from those 1860s to late 1800s, we were in that 7 to 15 bushel range for yields. Yeah, 7 for statewide average. And now we sit in the peak yield so far was in 2019 was at 57. So you're talking a 50 bushel increase really over the last 150 years. And I think that's one thing has been a common misperception in wheat. You got to remember, because people dropped wheat from their farm, sometimes it's 1 or 2 generations ago that grew wheat. And then when you have a 30, 40-year-old producers that's starting to take over leadership, they've never seen wheat. And then they talk to their grandfather or their father, mother, whoever it might be on the farm. They're like, oh yeah, we used to grow wheat and it was 30, 40 bushel. Well, then they just assume things haven't changed a lot, and because they're just not in tune with it. So, so statewide, we're at 57 bushels, and you got to remember we're at 14 inches of rainfall in the Panhandle. Predominant amount of the wheat acres are the southern counties in the Panhandle. So, essentially, Kimball over to Cheyenne being the largest producer of wheat in terms of acres in the state, but. So yields a little lower there. As we move east, yields go up across crops in terms of dry land, right? Just because we have ETs correlated with yield and we have more potential. But Eastern 3 crop reporting districts, there's 8 districts in Nebraska, numbered 1 through 9 with a number missing. So you can do the math there. So because 9 is southeast. But if you look at the 3 districts in the east, so that's I think 3, 6, and 9. So from northeast, east central, southeast, there was a big time frame in there where yields were flat. So really from about the 1980s through 2000, for 20 years, yields were flat. While at the same time, we had a huge investment in improved yields and increased yields per year in corn and soybeans that the industry was kicking out. So at the time, the trajectory was wheat yields were flat, but corn and soybean yields per acre were going up.
Sure.
And so there was a lot of math crunching to everybody looking at that and was like, okay, this is what we have now. So a lot of people got out of wheat. But then what happened in about 2000 till now, we've seen a linear increase in yield of about 1 bushel per acre per year. So going from 40 to almost 65 bushels being the average across those eastern districts. And so that's the piece that people have forgotten about or just don't know how the industry's changed, the genetics and our production practices. And so that's been a big talking point that I've had with growers is let's look at today's math, not the math that you've maybe talked to the previous generation about.
Yeah.
And would you kind of mentioned it, but would you say that that's mainly genetics or that we're learning how to better produce wheat in our cropping practices?
No, I think it's twofold. One is the genetics. So breeders have a pretty good handle of what diseases are more troublesome here versus the southern panhandle. So it's not static across the state what the challenges are from drought, wheat streak mosaic, wheat stem sawfly in the west to here in the east being more fungal diseases. So we're at Fusarium head blight, stripe rust, leaf rust. And so we just have a lot. Breeders have done a really good job on the rust front, but that's an ongoing battle. But even Fusarium head blight, an FHB1 gene, we'll be having a variety that we'll be releasing with that. And actually a new one through USDA ARS was just announced last week called FHB7. Neither transgenic, both already in that genome and just getting those into line. So we'll even have an additional tool for in the future here to fight one of our biggest challenges with Fusarium head blight in the east. And so a big part of that's genetics. I think the producers that have kept wheat over the last 25 years when we've seen that 1 bushel per acre per year increase are also the growers who have figured out how to produce wheat at a more efficient and affordable, profitable part of their operation. So I think it's both. It's the ones that have kept doing it have figured it out, and then they've had genetics to help them.
Sure. And I think about those producers who are doing it. That's obviously one of your best sales people or group of individuals to sell that because they're the ones that have learned through kind of trial and error what is really successful for them. And I'm sure, as you mentioned, kind of the different genetic breeds and things through time has really kind of changed the game and just being a lot more efficient and figuring out how do you make this really work well within your system. So it's cool you guys are really invested in that. I know like when some of your former roles extension, I know that's part of that job is getting that information out. And so I think there's a huge opportunity to keep building on that momentum that you guys started.
And you work with quite a few producers. Is there anything that sticks out with you for those producers who have kept it in their rotation long term? Like why are they choosing to keep it in their rotation as opposed to jumping to soybeans?
Yeah, I would say a fair chunk of those small grain winter wheat producers in the eastern third of the state and even central part of the state now is kind of in that same thing. It's more diverse operations. They likely have cattle or some type of livestock a part of the rotation. And what that does is allows you to grow, I would say the most common, a forage crop, whether it's hay or grazing after wheat. Because if you think about in the east, we have some moisture to grow a second crop in that year without depleting soil moisture for next year's crop, which is very different in the west and those dryland cropping systems. But here in the east, we can do that with less risk. And so when you add cattle to the operation and can leverage the value of that forage after the wheat, profitability increases.
Yeah.
My particular operation with my brother, we don't have cattle ourselves, but there's a pretty big straw market for kind of in that Omaha, Fremont area that we operate in. And so it's not something I love to haul off the carbon, but it makes almost just as much as the grain does.
Really?
And so that made our wheat crop more profitable than corn this past year in 2025.
Really?
Yep.
Oh, wow. That's really cool.
Yeah, and we'll definitely drill down on some of those economics a little more later. One other question I had before we move on from kind of the history of wheat in Nebraska. When we started seeing the wheat acres drop off in Nebraska, what other states, I guess, picked up that production? Or I guess what states are known for large winter wheat production?
Large part of it is in Nebraska, we've decreased acres, but then yields have gone up. So peak production, you think total bushels produced in Nebraska, I think the highest was about 1980. So even though yields have been going down yields have been going up, but acres had been going down from 1950 to 1980. So we've made up for it. Now, since then, we just have total less bushels in Nebraska. You got to remember, wheat's a world crop. So we have production in parts of South America, Ukraine, Russia. I mean, the list goes on, China. So there's production of wheat across the world, Australia. So it's a world crop. And so, everybody's done a good job of producing wheat. In general, the world wheat supply has been pretty adequate. And so I would say the shift has been actually just the need for less wheat acres, just because we're producing more in the U.S. And so, in terms of other key states, our neighbor to the south is the largest producer of hard red winter wheat in the United States. There's a lot of wheat up in North Dakota, for example, and Pacific Northwest, but then you get into different classes of wheat. So there's actually 6 classes of wheat. There's on the red wheat side, there's hard and soft. Then on the white wheat, there's hard and soft there, and then there's red spring wheat. And then you have durum wheat. So durum is a lot of times the hardest wheat, what you think about pasta. The soft wheats might be your crackers, some of those others. So they all have different makeup of what those certain classes really are used for in terms of the food we eat. And so Nebraska is in a unique place, and that's why acres is really interesting in eastern Nebraska. Northeast Nebraska has never had much winter wheat. You can go back the last 150 years, and we were right on the line where winter hardiness was an issue historically. So then the transition went from winter wheat to spring wheat into South Dakota, and so Northeast Nebraska was kind of no man's land. They were never really growing much wheat. It was oats actually, but with improved genetics, we've really moved winter wheat all up into the Dakotas now in terms of winter hardiness. And so I think there's huge yield potential for wheat actually in the state for rain-fed. Northeast Nebraska probably has some of the best weather to grow the highest yields. And for example, I had to grow up in Thurston County last year in 2024. I think he averaged 103 bushels across 300 acres.
Wow.
So lots of shifts there. I think part of that, continuing to see shifts in consumer demand, what we eat where, and it's competing with other crops for what's in our diet and what's in livestock's diet. So
that's true. So I'm curious then. So kind of looking at the historical perspective to today, do you think there is so it sounds like there's a growing trend towards incorporating more winter wheat into your system. Is that, I'm sure it's maybe not necessarily be exponential increase, but it sounds like there's more interest growing. And I think that may just kind of speak to interest in diversification. I hear it all the time, and we were talking about it, before, that's, is there a market? Is there an opportunity there? I want to try something different. I want to be creative and kind of think of a different, enterprise, so I can kind of have that little bit of an edge, especially in the times in which, if corn's down or soybeans are down price-wise, having something else to make those, balance the books per se is very important for obviously a lot of people out there.
Yeah. There's lots of reasons. We can get into economics and some things later. Lots of reasons why individual operations have added wheat to their operation. from that livestock component to the whole soil health regenerative ag movement to distribution of workload and distribution of when income comes in on the farm for cash flow purposes. So lots of things. Yeah. So in terms of wheat acres in the East, we kind of bottomed out in about 2019. And then they've gradually been creeping back up on average, especially here in East Central, Lincoln North, for a lot of those different reasons. Overall acres since 2019 across the state have been right at that 800,000 to 900,000, kind of flattened off finally. So we went down, and then the last 5-6 years we've kind of flattened out in terms of acres. I'd love to see the state get back to at least 1 million acres, and this isn't a unique trend. South Dakota has been experiencing the same thing with increase in soybean and corn acres, drop in wheat, and so again, just difference in genetics and profitability of other crops, and just the infrastructure that exists between different crops too, which we'll get into why wheat's a little more challenging in some parts of the state than others from an infrastructure standpoint.
Yeah.
Before we hop on to kind of the next area of discussion, you mentioned winter hardiness. Can you define that a little more for folks who may be interested?
Yeah. So unlike our other main crops that are all spring planted, so that would be oats, for example, corn and soybeans. So corn and soybeans are warm season annuals. Spring oats or oats would be a cool season annual. Winter wheat, triticale, winter barley, some of our other small grains, they're winter annual. So similar to our winter annual weeds that people complain about, whether that's henbit, field pennycress, mare's tail, they start their life cycle in the fall, kind of maintain in a rosette or a smaller vegetative state, and then they have to survive through the winter. And then when things warm up in the spring, they start, come out of that winter dormancy and complete their life cycle. And, usually that's early summer for most of those winter annuals. So same thing with wheat. So one thing we have to make sure that wheat crop survives our winters. And so there's several factors there. Part of it's genetics, part of it's environment, and even snow cover. So, man, if you got 2 inches of snow, it can get down to negative 40 degrees. It's going to be fine because it's insulated. But as soon as you take that snow cover away, that crown and that soil temperature is a little more exposed. So that's what wheat breeders have really worked on. Steve Benzinger, the former breeder, talked a lot and focused a lot on that early in his career. Now the breeders have a pool of genetics that they've resting on the shoulders of past breeders, so they don't have to tackle that. They have the germplasm they need that has that winter hardiness already, and they can work on other traits that we need on top of that. So that's why you don't see canola in Nebraska, winter canola. You really have to go to Kansas south. Same thing. We just don't have the winter hardiness in that particular crop to move it north. So so winter hardiness is just that ability to survive our winters in that vegetative state.
Do you think something like that, like canola, would over time, from the breeding side of things, just kind of work to get that incorporated in from the hardiness?
Yeah, I know.
I'm just kind of thinking of that as an example.
Man, that's why there's people that are looking at a weed or field pennycress trying to make it a crop.
Oh, really?
Because it has that winter hardiness, and it's a brassica too. I think so. I think over time, we have the opportunities, genetics. A lot of crops we're not in transgenics, like small grains, wheat. We don't right now. There's not any transgenic wheat grown in the market.
Yeah.
Though, could we develop that in the future? Sure, but then we have trading partners that may not be interested in that.
Sure.
To who we trade to. So, so I think in other crops is probably similar, but even in the cover crop market, I think there's huge improvements that we'll see in genetics of certain cover crop species. We'll be talking about varieties of turnips or varieties of, whatever, cover crop we're growing that might change the game for us in the future in the long run.
That's cool. That's really cool.
So say you have a longtime corn and soybean producer, and they come to you and they want to put winter wheat into their crop rotation. Where are you having them start? Are you having them planted after soybeans, planted after corn? Where do you recommend?
Yeah, like most recommendations, whether it's like me teaching someone new to drive in our household, he's now 16, but when did we start that? We started that already at 15. Yeah. Right? Same thing in wheat. I want people to start thinking about how they're going to incorporate that crop, add that to the rotation at least a year out. When you think about crop rotation, even alfalfa or oats, in herbicides in the rotation, we have restrictions. And so thinking about the organization of that crop rotation takes a little bit more planning than just thinking about, okay, I'm just going to switch back and forth between corn and soybeans. Dwayne Beck, now retired, worked at Dakota Lakes Research Farm, spent tons of time on crop rotation. Love his work, worked with him when I was up there. But part of production ag, there's a lot of decisions. If you think about what producers decisions they make in a day, or either of you. I mean, you make hundreds of decisions a day, times every day. There's such thing as decision fatigue.
Oh, absolutely.
So I think certain producers maybe just don't want that stress, that added decision, and then some are willing to take that extra thought on. So I think that's hurdle number one is the extra thought that's going to take to add a new crop. And this wouldn't be even wheat. If you ask them to add sweet corn to their farm, same things would come up, right? You're adding a new crop, new logistics, everything. So one, in that year ahead, study. Guess what? You get to come back to school. So you're studying what? You're going to rely on people in the community that still have that crop. You're going to rely on extension. You're going to maybe rely on a private industry agronomist. You're going to rely on maybe the wheat company. For example, like me, I provide that guidance still. Even though I'm doing the wheat varieties, I have that expertise. So just gaining information. And so then you can hit the ground running. So what I've done and what I'm talking about actually next week is winter woes of new growers. And it's really to share the story of mistakes that growers have made that added wheat and learning from their mistakes. And so I'm actually just going to highlight in the talk, here's mistakes that were made. Here's how not to make that same mistake.
That's good.
So I've seen if you can have due diligence and not make those key common mistakes year one, most of those growers I've worked with continue to grow wheat after year one. The growers who have some missteps, who just didn't know something, and you don't know what you don't know, have an issue year one with production, and guess what? It didn't go well, and they don't want to risk it or try it again. So just like any other thing you're training for or thinking to take on that's maybe new to you activity, try to do as much as you can to prepare.
Yeah, well, and you mentioned earlier you have you were talking about the generational aspect of it. So you get it, you're a couple generations
you don't
out,
have that there
you
anymore.
don't have that institutional knowledge, and so it's
Exactly.
like, well, starting off and essentially that's just human nature. We want stuff to be easy. That's just the reality of it. So if I can make my system incredibly easy that I don't have to do a lot of thinking about it, well, why not? Why would I not? So that's just general human nature. But ultimately, I think that's, as you were talking about, that educational piece, I think that's the opportunity where extension and private industry and a lot of other organizations can work strategically with those individuals to say, and I loved your aspect about, talking about the challenges and kind of here things went wrong. We just got to be honest and say, hey, we have challenges out there. I was in a meeting last week with Nate, and we had a producer, and he was kind of sharing, here's some challenges I faced, and here's how we kind of learned from that. And I was like, that was actually really refreshing to hear, because at the end of the day, we can't expect perfection. No. We have to learn from the mistakes and say, hey, there's an opportunity for us to take and do this maybe a little differently, and we got to work at it. It's like going to the gym and working out. You're not going to get strong from one session. It's a progression of over time. So that's really good.
Yep.
And when you're telling a producer to start researching, say, a year or two ahead of even bringing wheat into their rotation, what are, say, 3 or 4 main things that you think a grower should focus on to ensure that they have a successful crop?
One's going to start at the end, which is where you bring in that crop. So if you're in far northeast Nebraska, depending on where you sit, there might be, if you're far northeast corner, you get into where there's elevators just into Nebraska and just across the Missouri River. But from there, all the way down to Fremont and Schuyler, there's no place to bring it. So one, do you have the manpower, the trucking, to be able to move it from, let's say, Norfolk, Nebraska up north or down to Fremont? Same thing with the guy that I've worked with in that Pender area. He drives it down to Fremont. So that's one. Another, that class of wheat, I had this come up once from a mistake. Someone grew soft red winter wheat, not hard. Completely different class. Elevators here don't take that. Now where are you going to bring it?
Sure.
Yep. And so you need to know what class of wheat you need to grow, and this is doing your homework. So one is marketing. So if you think at the end of the day, this is adding a crop to your farm enterprise, crop insurance, all of that. It's about profitability at the end of the day for that
Sure.
farm operation, family
Sure.
farm. It's a business. So marketing is a key piece there. So where are you going to bring it? What does the price look like? And then you go back to the beginning. And I actually have a wheat growers quick guide that I put together in Extension a couple years ago, and update that. And it just walks you through by time of year what you need to be thinking about.
that's
So,
really cool.
First step actually is going to be on there is usually variety selection. What are you going to plant? Who are you going to buy that from? Again, in eastern Nebraska, you might be an hour away from who you're going to pick that seed up in some cases. So there to seeding rate and the list just as you work through the year. But probably the main one is just that I'll talk about at a conference next week with certified crop advisors, just picking the right field. If you think anytime you do something, new skill, start small. It's okay to plant one field of winter wheat. You don't need to go say maybe your long-term goal is 1/5 of your acres are going to be winter wheat.
Sure.
And I'm going to rotate that through. Don't do that. Start with one field first. Get the bugs worked out, and then you can work it in or scale it up. So obviously another simple suggestion is don't put that 40 acres right along the highway where everybody can see it, because if you have an issue, guess what? I mean, farming, there's a lot of rural sociology involved in production ag. So that's would be another key suggestion, because if you have a mistake, at least it's not as obvious. So that's one. And that there's a lot of pride in farmers and doing a good job, just like there is in any of us in our careers. And so, again, removing those stumbling blocks, but put it in a place where the field's going to be profitable, or good field selection, which we can, is part of that, and location. So I would say first marketing, and then go back to the other end, the beginning of where you're going to get the seed, what field you're going to put it in. And then we can start working on the specific agronomics, like what varieties to select and why, what seeding rate, seeding depth, do I need a seed treatment or not? What's the value of certified seed over bin run seed, which is a whole nother can of worms, which you don't want to do. And then you're working through then the soil fertility part of it, from soil sampling, past soil samples, to herbicide, if that's an issue, weed management, then then there's more fertility again, then there's disease management towards the end. And then the last one at the end, right before marketing, is harvest. And guess what? You don't harvest it like corn and soybeans. And so that's one of those kind of mistakes. What do you need to think about? And I tell growers, maybe you just do the drill part yourself, or maybe even have someone custom drill it that's drilled before. Because if they've custom drilled wheat before, they probably know how to set that drill up.
Yeah.
Same thing on the harvest side. If you haven't harvested before, and there's a neighbor that also has wheat, and it looks like they've done a good job, you might think about having them custom harvest it. Because at the end of the day, if they have that combine set so it threshes right, you're not having grain come out the back, they have the small wire concave, everything, it's worth it probably to pay them more dollars an acre for custom over trying to do all that work yourself initially, especially on one field. Yep. Right. And then as you scale up, you're going to learn how to do those things yourself, work that into your operation, your own equipment, so it's less expensive, and you're going to learn some of those things as you go. So it's okay to walk before you run.
Yeah, that's really good. And even thinking about that, it's like a peer-to-peer learning experiment. So it's kind of getting to learn from your neighbors and kind of talking about, the challenges that they're facing and opportunities to kind of collaborate and learn, along the way. And I like that illustration too. Kind of, you mentioned, kind of putting them in, say, we'll say the back 40,
Yeah.
And so away from the road. I think that's kind of interesting illustration, but it kind of speaks to we talk about with conservation programs. We're not asking you to take a whole field out of production. It could just be a small, maybe diversifying your assets by say 5%, and we just take and put a little bit over here. And just it's an opportunity so when times are hard, you have something else there. And then, by the way, hey, now in addition to putting it there, I get a payment for it. And I'll also could potentially lease that out for hunting, or I could do some type of ecotourism opportunity. But it's all about diversification. So you're not kind of putting all your proverbial eggs in one basket. And so I think that's kind of the cool part of kind of testing it out, trying it, and then learning through those kind of trial and error experiments that you do. And then, eventually I can kind of get incorporated in. One question I did want to ask you. So you have producers that are obviously, you mentioned that kind of generational aspect. So are producers today with equipment and stuff, are they kind of set up to kind of step into that realm of wheat production, or are they kind of like they don't have necessarily some of the equipment that they really need to be successful in that? And I'm sure it varies by individual, I get that, but like just in general, how can, people potentially get over some of those hurdles to get started?
Yeah, so a question I common get, and you got a lot of this context is Eastern Nebraska.
Sure.
So, if you're out in the Southern Panhandle, there's wheat everywhere. It's likely the past generation was growing wheat. Maybe they got out of it back in. So, definitely an Eastern Nebraska lens, Central Nebraska lens to this. But in terms of the combine, you have what you need. It's just switching out concaves and making some adjustments. So it's mostly knowing what to do there than a big investment. On the drill side, you may not have a drill anymore because you may be, with precision planters and technology, maybe everything's 30-inch planter with corn and soybeans. So you don't have a drill. So there's people who custom drill. Actually, one of our members, besides selling seed, also custom drills, for example. So for those people who are coming new back to the farm, I think there is a small business venture to do custom drilling, both cover crops and these small grains like wheat as a side small enterprise. Sure. So I think an opportunity, or a farmer retiring, keeping the tractor, getting a drill, and this is going to be my semi-retirement job. Yeah. There is need out there for people to do custom drilling because at the end of the day, farmers are busy, and maybe the one risk they don't want to take on or financial burden is to buy a new or used drill that they don't have to seed wheat. So then the question's like, well, I already have a planter. Can I just double plant? And 15-inch wheat, well, you could have RTK, so easy. I can split my rows. And now I go from 30 to 15. 15-inch rows still probably yield 15 bushel less than 7.5, 8, or 10.
Oh, wow.
And that was work done in eastern Kansas by a researcher down there. So the answer is, yeah, you can. You're leaving some yield behind, but maybe that's year one, and then you work on getting a drill yield 2, or find someone else to drill it. Sure. So that's a really good. What's the entry point? Other equipment, nothing special in terms of a sprayer. Some nozzles differences on spraying for fusarium head blight, but some people hire an airplane or helicopter or drone to spray too. So I would say the drill's probably the one piece of equipment they may not have on the farm. But, and those are easy, not hard to get, but equipment's not cheap.
Yeah, that's true. Well, and it's actually, I liked your perspective kind of on like other business ventures for people, because similarly, when we were planning our prairie strips, that was one of the comments we got from the person who was doing it, was essentially having somebody with experience running a drill, particularly in that case, putting in our prairie plant seeds, very different. And what he said, he's like, honestly, I have people that they would take and go out there, they make one pass, and they're like, oh, I'm out of seed. And he was like, that's
even more expensive than wheat seed.
Yeah. So he said having somebody who's actually done it before is really important to kind of get that expertise, because that can help you set you up for success.
Yeah. I remember the first time on my farm, we rented the Pheasants Forever drill and drilled our diverse mix for CRP. I was nervous, and so I halved the rate.
Oh, sure.
Because I'm going to half the rate, and then if something goes wrong, I should still hopefully add seed left.
Yeah, sure.
In this case, I probably was like a tad under half, so I went back the second time and still had a little bit of seed left, so I undershot it a little bit, but took me twice as long. But I didn't want to do that exact same thing. I didn't want to run out of really expensive seed mix, and I wanted diversity out there.
Sure.
Same thing on the drill. I've run into, that's one of the woes I'll talk about next week for new growers, is actually run into issues just getting that crop in the ground the right way with the drill. So it's not just as easy as peanut butter and jelly.
That's funny.
When you're talking field selection for a grower looking to try wheat on their operation, is wheat a crop that can handle maybe a rougher field, or should you find really those best premier acres to try your first crop on?
Yeah, here in the East, I would focus on, highly erodible land, or land that you really want to see some improvement in soil health, aggregate stability. That aggregate stability is huge if we think about soil health and why we add wheat. That brings to the rotation is creating that soil structure so we improve infiltration and reduce erosion. wheat I would not put in a poorly drained, river bottom field. It's not going to handle that as well. And then we run into a disease if you plant it early called soil-borne mosaic or soil-borne mosaic virus. And then the other big piece I've run into, because if you think about when wheat harvest is, in here in the East, it's end of June, early July. Mm-hmm. Our highest rainfall month is usually the month of June. And so getting in the field can be problematic to get that weed out. So I've had some people put it in poorly drained fields, and then all of a sudden they're waiting a month later to get the weed out of the field. So I would definitely avoid those poorly drained river bottom fields and focus on fields where you would want to see some improvement in erosion control and soil health.
Yeah, makes sense. How does wheat as a commodity crop stack up to corn and soybeans as far as fertilizer needs and moisture needs? Is it less? Is it more? Yeah. What's that look like?
Yeah, let's start with the water side of that. So if you look at evapotranspiration, that's what evaporates from the surface and then transpires through the plant. That is correlated with yield potential. So actually, even though if we remember the drought of 2012, or we can go back to 2022, 23, irrigated yields can be really high in dry years, because if we can irrigate them, there's a big demand for water to go through that plant, which means yield potential goes up. Sure. And that relationship is linear unless something derails it, like southern rust this past year in corn or tar spot. So, soybeans is probably that 22 to 23 inches to kind of maximize yields to run through. Corn is similar. Wheat's about 16 to 18 inches. And then alfalfa's off the charts. You're over 32 inches if you really wanted to run enough water through that crop to get those high tonnages. So wheat does use less. And part of that's when its life cycle is. If you think about a big chunk of that's these vegetative states over the winter or in the spring or the fall when temperatures are cool. Yeah. So you don't have that demand. And then it's a quick growing crop really from March until June when it matures. Yeah. And then those are months where you get a decent amount of rainfall too, where you're not banking on soil moisture through the summer like you are with corn and soybeans. So that's an advantage. And that's why there's so much wheat out west. If you think about it, man, if you have 16 inches of rainfall, not 100%. If precipitation use efficiency, I wish it was 100%, but right, every drop of rain doesn't count towards soil moisture. Sure. That's why you see wheat out there and not dryland soybeans or corn as much, just because of the difference in total water use over those crops. But for us in the East, where we have 30 inches, that means we have some water to work with, like I mentioned, to grow a double crop soybean or double crop forage, or like in my case, I just did oats in August and then worked with my cow-calf neighbor. He was interested in just haying that off in October. So that was the one way we went. So so that's the water difference. So some of that water's early in the year. In the East, for example, here, if you didn't get the wheat stand you wanted, or it didn't look like you wanted to for the yields you would want in the East to make that profitable, it can be a really good cover crop. So a failure can turn into a cover crop and still have some benefit, right, in terms of weed suppression, erosion control, soil health improvement over time. So that's what I've also told people is like, well, if things don't go year one right, we can still convert this to a cover crop. It's still going to be fine with your crop insurance, and we can have Plan B, and Plan B doesn't look too bad either. So
that's good.
So that's on the water side. On the fertility side, that it's a grass crop like corn. It's the biggest input's nitrogen, just like it is corn. Phosphorus is probably more important in wheat than it is in corn, though. We need a little bit higher soil fertility on that for a soil test part per million for phosphorus. If you think about phosphorus uptake, it's diffusion based, and so that's regulated by both moisture and temperature. So we need a little bit more from our soil there just because of the temperatures we're working against. The other ones that are, I wouldn't say unique, but sulfur's a big one. Most producers in the East have sulfur in corn, but sulfur in wheat has a lot to do with that protein. And at the end of the day, wheat is a food crop. Sure. And the protein in there is really important in terms if you buy a bag of flour, what does it say on the side? Yeah. I'm not going to promote a brand, but we get King Arthur out ourselves and it says 11.5%, 11.5. Percent protein. So the market's really interested in protein, and nitrogen's a big part of it, so is sulfur. And then the other nutrient, which is probably the most surprising to growers here in eastern Nebraska, is chloride. So that's not a nutrient that we often think about. It's work that Kansas did and realized, hey, for the eastern part of Kansas, we're short on chloride. If you think about chloride, a lot of that, if you're near an ocean, you get some of those with salt and moisture in the air, but we don't have a good source of chloride. So coming from atmospheric deposition, and it is a nutrient. If you think about Mediterranean crop and a crop, chloride and salts, but we do need chloride and we don't need a lot. So it's a common fertilizer we have. Potash or potassium is potassium chloride. Yeah. And so you're talking 40, 50 pounds of potash to meet that need, even if you're short. And so I did some work on tissue analysis in the past, surveys of farmers' fields in eastern Nebraska, as well as soil samples, and most things came back. That was the number one deficient nutrient in wheat crop here. And so it doesn't cost a lot. A lot of times you need some potassium for maintenance just for what you're removing anyway. So that would be one that would probably catch growers off guard that they need to think about.
That's helpful.
So as far as bushel to bushel compared to corn, is wheat using nitrogen more efficiently? So does it take less nitrogen in the grand scheme of things or more?
I would say it's a little bit heavier because protein's a big part of that. So for, let's say, 100 bushel wheat crop, you're going to probably be shooting for 100 bushel or 100 pounds of applied nitrogen. Okay. So a 1-to-1, even with the crop rotation there. What's unique versus the advantage corn has? Corn has the advantage that it's growing when there's warmth, and so a lot of our nitrogen that we get in our corn crop doesn't come from our applied fertilizer. It comes from our soil, mineralization of that organic matter by microorganisms. It's cold, and so those microbes aren't moving very fast, and so we don't get a lot of mineralization. That's why if you plant wheat after soybean, wheat after corn, there's no nitrogen recommendation difference that I have. Oh, sure. Because you're just not going to get mineralization of that soybean residue because it's just so early in the year. By the time it ramps up and running, the wheat crop's almost mature. Sure. So nitrogen's probably a big one. On the flip side to that, though, nitrogen maybe isn't quite as efficient. There's a lot of carbon and nitrogen that the roots in corn they've found kind of sloughs off or kind of feedbacks into the system. So they've looked at it on the soil health side that you actually have more potential mineralizable nitrogen in your soil in the future and more total nitrogen there that it's putting in your soil. So I would say it's less efficient, but it actually helps you in the terms of crop rotation. Plus and minus. And then, of course, wheat's great at aggregate stability, which, my past role is soil health. If there's one thing you can improve that correlates, a physical improvement in your soil correlates with microbial health and improvement, it's aggregate stability. And those fine root structure near the surface does a great job compared to corn and soybeans.
And just to clarify, so you're saying wheat production and the biomass from wheat production leads to longer term nitrogen availability in your soil.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep. And so more of that you put in may not come out in the crop, but we're able to. They're looking at the roots, and the roots just kind of slough off, or some of that just stays more in the system than it goes out maybe. So I don't know about true efficiency, but it's just a little bit different than what we see with corn. And in this case, on the soil health rise, and then what that leads to in the future, you need less nitrogen for your corn as you're in that rotation longer.
Sure. Yeah, sure. So not to totally get off on a rabbit trail, but you mentioned soil health. So have you seen a general trend in more producers thinking about their crop rotations and soil health and kind of thinking about that long-term sustainability of those fields and what they want to get, out of them, not as opposed to kind of like the here and now this year?
Yeah. I think actually cover crops and the whole regenerative ag has probably been the biggest benefit to that, besides the cover crop market. If you're selling cover crops, is wheat. Because all of a sudden you start growing winter wheat, triticale or cereal rye as a cover crop, and you're like, what happens if I just let this thing grow? Yeah. What happens if I make this a cash crop instead of just a cover crop? And so some people have made that hop from, I've grown small grain as a cover crop. Maybe I want to grow this as a crop now. Yeah. So from that standpoint, yes, on the soil health, there's quite a few university studies at those long-term crop rotation sites. Sure. So there's one in Monmouth, Illinois. There's one up just past Detroit in Canada. Several other ones. unfortunately, it's always rob Peter to pay Paul on long-term crop rotations and university studies because it's hard to, hey, I want a 30-year grant. Usually not how it works. But that's where we really see the benefits come out. Like that one in Monmouth in Western Illinois, you really see the improvement in aggregate stability and crop yield. In the order of like 10 bushel better corn with wheat in the rotation and 3 to 4 bushel better on soybeans. So when we talk about economics, there's the here and now.
Yeah.
And then there's the benefit of wheat in the rotation that you see immediately and then long-term. Immediately, that crop rotation benefit can show up pretty fast depending on what your most limiting factor is. So like in soybeans, you might have some white mold issues, sudden death syndrome. There's some advantage to having wheat in the rotation because now you have another year in between. And over the long term. So when I do a balance sheet for wheat, it'd be just like alfalfa. You got to count for money that crop made you in years after the crop is no longer in the field. So if corn yields 10 bushel better and beans 3 bushel better, you take that price of corn and soybeans, those bushels, and you add that to money your wheat crop made you. Same thing on alfalfa. More growers have grown alfalfa. They know that when they plant corn after alfalfa, they don't need much nitrogen. You know, look at the NEB guide. It's 90 to 150 pound credit. Guess what? Where'd that credit come from? It's not money. It shows up in your corn balance sheet. Wow, look how great corn was after alfalfa. But that money was money the alfalfa made. That should be in your alfalfa accrual or balance sheet when you talk to your banker. Say, hey, this is where the money's truly coming from. And I think that's where wheat and alfalfa's got shortchanged, even oats. In our crop rotation is we just think 1 year at a time, not actually some of the benefits that benefit and that money really comes from a previous year.
No, that's really good.
Have you had those conversations with growers, and are they receptive to looking at their balance sheet like that?
When I've done alfalfa, yes, because I've had growers have yield monitor down. Like, whoa, I mean, my corn and soybean years are higher 4 years after.
Wow.
In some cases.
Really?
And so then they're like, okay, let's talk about wheat. Yeah. Do you think there's some here? Oh yeah, I guess maybe there would be. So I always like to be conservative. For example, Paul Hay since passed away, but he was a long-term extension educator down in Gage County, and he had surveyed over 2,000 fields through farmers to say, what was your yield and what was your previous crop? And showed it was an 18 bushel increase in corn and like 5 in soybeans with wheat in the rotation.
Wow.
Right. Now, that Monmouth study, they got more soil moisture, more rain.
Sure.
So part of that's a water plus. Remember, it's not using all that water, so some of it's stored for the next corn crop if you put no crop in at all after wheat. So some of that's moisture benefit there. See, now hybrids are more drought tolerant than when Paul did that survey in early 2000s down in Gage County. So that's why I usually use like 3 and 10. It's probably a little more. Same thing, the soybean credit. We only give a portion of that, usually, after corn in that rotation. That's a rotation benefit. It's probably more like 70 pounds, but university, they had put it a little bit lower just to not overcredit something either. So
that's really cool. Yeah, I appreciate you answering that question about soil health, because I think that's one of the big challenges, and we always talk about when we're putting in conservation practices, is and I'll use a prairie strips example. The first 3 years, it really doesn't look the greatest. And it's that kind of progression over time. But it's once you get past that year 3, then you're like, oh, okay, now things are starting to really look good, kind of what I expected. But it's that we want everything now. And I get it. Like, I'm not, faulting anybody. I'm one of the most impatient people out there. But it's kind of thinking about that long-term perspective. And I've had some producers I've talked with, and that's one of the things that they now kind of looking back, they're saying, what can I do differently to ensure the long-term sustainability of my operation, whether that's diverse crops, whether that's conservation practices, combination of both, just thinking a little bit differently maybe than what they had in the past. And I remember one person was like, I was so financially driven when I was younger. And it's like, well, I get that. Like, obviously you got bills to pay. There's no question about that. But he's like, I kind of wish in hindsight, it's like I wish there would have been an opportunity there to, maybe incorporate some of these things and thinking a little bit differently like I am now. Yeah. So
I had 2 younger producers, probably in their, upper 30s, 40s down in Jefferson Gage County area. Loved their approach. They came to me, hey, Nathan, we know you've worked with wheat, with new growers. We wanted to grow wheat, add wheat to the rotation. And I think one of their dads had grown wheat, so there was a little bit of experience there. But they said, we want to try it for 3 years, and then we're going to decide if we're going to keep it or not. And boy, that was probably the most unique perspective. Most people are like, I'll try it a year. But if you think about it, I mean, a crop is you get one shot. It's 1 year at a time. So to get 3 times of experience, it takes 3 years. Yeah. This isn't like figuring out how to play horseshoes for the first time. And you can play, you get a lot of throws in really quick.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Right? You got one throw on one field year one. And so, having a commitment, I would say the same would be true of your prairie strips, conservation practice, cover crops. Like if you can commit, you say, okay, we've done our homework. This looks like it might fit. Let's try it on a limited basis.
Yeah, sure.
Let's do this for 3 years. Yep. And then we'll evaluate it. We'll keep track of things and see if this, and guess what? They're still doing it.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And that's probably the ideal approach, but getting people to commit to 3 years, they came with that in their heads already. And I always use that as an example of, wow, it's like, that's a really good outlook to come with we're going to do 3-year trial.
Yep.
So,
well, and that's, I guess the other thing is having a network of people, back to your earlier point, and you mentioned, a private agronomist, extension, et cetera. So you can take and work with them. You have, people you can bounce ideas off, and then also kind of co-producing that science together to help you decide. So it's not just looking at the yield that I'm producing, but like, from the soil health perspective, am I changing things?
Yeah.
Because some of that stuff is just, it's really a systems level issue they were thinking about. But if you are able to take and co-produce that science and collecting that data along the way, then that gives you more confidence in saying, hey, yeah, this is kind of panning out. And yeah, I think I could invest more time. But like you said, it's not, you got to start out, massive, start out small, test it, see what works, what doesn't, and then maybe it doesn't work for what you're wanting to do. And that's totally fine, but at least you tried something different.
Yeah.
Keeping going in the area economics, is winter wheat a more expensive crop to grow compared to corn and soybeans? And obviously, there's a lot that goes into this question. It's kind of a loaded question, but what would you say is the average cost to get winter wheat from planting to harvest?
Yeah. So I can use our farm. So my brother and I, we both have full-time jobs. So the farm's like a part-time hobby farm. So it's small. But my wife always jokes that 50 acres gets scouted or more attention per acre than any farm in Nebraska, which is probably true. But it's where rubber meets the road for us. Like I get to write the checks, make those agronomic decisions, custom hire, or, do some of the work ourselves. So just on our balance sheet, it's about $300 cheaper to produce wheat than it is corn. And it's about $100 per acre cheaper than soybeans. Is kind of our current economics. So there's less risk than if you say, if I've never grown corn before, yellow number 2, hybrid corn before, you're talking $1,000 an acre here in eastern Nebraska of money you got in between land, whether it's cash rent, loan, if you're a newer producer on that land, property tax. By the time you paying yourself, by the time you get all that background cost, and then you have the actual quick term, short bills like the actual seed, fertilizer, herbicide. But probably the biggest thing here in the East that surprises people, like this last year, we had no herbicide cost. Do you know what a herbicide bill for corn and soybeans, if you are dealing with like water hemp or palmer, you're talking $100 an acre between application and herbicide to deal with that. And now I'm at zero.
Yeah.
So there's big savings there. And again, that's picking the right field. If you don't have a lot of winter annuals, like we don't, we've worked on that over time just in corn, soybeans, there's not a lot there. And so what we've done, we've just moved that wheat field around on the acres we have to try to keep away from the shifting the weed species composition, which happens when you add wheat. One of the biggest ones that shows up first, at least in East Central Nebraska, is lamb's quarter.
Oh, yeah.
In Dodge, Washington, where every farmer that has wheat usually has more lamb's quarter than any other farm. It likes that. And so what you do is if you have enough acres and wheat's a low percent of your acres, you can just keep moving it around and stay ahead of the lamb's quarter. The other thing, seed cost is significantly cheaper. You're about here in the East, the seeding rates are higher than you would be in wheat country in the Panhandle. So you're talking $40 an acre, probably $40. So that compared to corn and soybeans, 70 to over 100.
Oh,
right?
absolutely. Yeah.
In terms of custom rate, not a lot different there. There's certain passes. You have a few less passes, probably not having herbicide, but you still have the planting trip, the harvest trip, and some of the other things. Fertilizer, that's why people love soybeans. You don't need to apply any nitrogen. So your fertilizer bill is not as high as corn, but it's a big chunk. I would say that's your biggest expense is nitrogen fertilizer in terms of inputs. The other one is a fungicide application. In wheat here in the East, most years you're going to need to put on a fungicide. If you look at the most yield determining factors of management, factor number one is variety selection. Number two is disease management, which is fungicide. So you're talking almost a 15 bushel difference between picking the right and wrong variety, and you're at least 10 bushel difference probably most years on wheat between spraying and not spraying. This particular year, like this last year, I had none. But the other years I did. And that's all about scouting. If the disease isn't there, you probably aren't going to get as much of a return from that fungicide, right? Or none. Yeah. But if there's stripe rust there or the risk of fusarium head blight's high, which there's a model that tells you it's high or not, which is great, you're probably going to get a return on fungicide in wheat sooner than you are corn and soybeans. In previous years. Now this last year in corn with southern rust, that was a different story. But so those are the costs. So there's a little less cost into it. Now the total revenue, if you're talking $5.25 wheat, it's not as high as soybeans. And then you're talking yield levels of wheat similar to soybeans. So my goal is always to get 80 bushel for wheat here in the East. I tell growers, your goal is to hit 80. My personal goal on my farm is 100, and I've been 86, like 96. This year I was 70 because I had hail, but then I got insurance check for 16 bushel. So I was back to 80s. So I've been 80s or 90s most of the time. And so a little less profit there, but again, there's potential for money after. So like I talked about oats or a forage crop. If you talk to Mary Drunowski, she said it's worth $70 an acre of forage out there after wheat here in the East. You could generate for your livestock operation, or straw, or I mean, there's different ways. And so by the time you factor that all in, again, we were profitable on our wheat and weren't on corn this year, and that's what the two crops that we had this year in our farm.
And obviously, you're wanting those good yields. Let's not skirt around that fact. But you also, it seems like you have an ROI, a return on investment mindset, right?
Yeah.
You're looking at inputs, and then, what's coming in, what's going out, and vice versa.
Yeah. Just like any operation, you need to pencil out what you think you're, like for 2026, if maybe you have some acres you're debating. Most people stay with their crop rotation, even corn, soybeans, but maybe I'm looking at economics of soybeans. Like maybe I should plant corn after corn. You start running your estimated expenses, what you think you might get for yield, the commodity price, and do a side-by-side. Which one looks more profitable today? What do I have locked in for sold, or what don't I? And so you always have the flexibility to adjust your crop rotation. Now there's pros and cons of a certain crop following corn after corn versus corn after soybeans, or even planting wheat after soybeans, wheat after corn. You could, depending on the situation, I could argue you might actually plant wheat after corn in some situations where that would be the right decision. And so those are all things you need to push the pencil on. I've been hoping kind of corner Glennis McClure on their ABC calculator to sit down with a whole bunch of wheat growers here in the East and get all of their numbers, which means someone's got to give up their private data so she can build that budget, that base budget in there. So when a new grower walks in, they have a base budget, and then they make the tweaks from there. Yeah. That's on my wish list. Yeah. I just between switching jobs, Glennis and I had talked to that before I left with Extension, and never circled back to it. So maybe we can here.
Well, that's actually on a side. That's something I need to actually get in touch with her. I was working on my annual reporting the other day, and particularly tied to conservation, because we've had some, John Wester and I have had some conversations about that, of incorporating some conservation practices in so producers can start kind of weighing out with the different budget models the university's putting out and seeing kind of what, does this practice fit? Does it not? Should I consider this or not? Yep. So, that's a good point.
When it comes to the elevators who take wheat, obviously you said they're limited across the state, but for the elevators that do take wheat, are they pretty steady on price, or is that price pretty volatile? What does that look like?
I mean, they're steady on prices if they follow the futures market.
Sure.
So they're at the mercy of traders and the market and the world demand. So there is difference in basis, though, right? That's the difference between the futures price. And if we're talking hard red winter wheat, that's Kansas City wheat price. And then what you get at the local, that difference is the basis. And so there are elevators that might be negative 40 cents. So it's 40 cents less they pay you than the futures price on a spot price. But then there's some that are 0 or plus 20. So the particular elevator I bring to is often 0 to positive. And they probably have one of the better markets here in eastern Nebraska, but they also have pretty high standards for quality. So if you don't bring the protein that they want, they dock you, but some years they have a protein premium. I could go to a different elevator far away. They really don't care about the protein, but I'm probably not going to get that same price. So depending on my quality of wheat, I could say, well, if I sample it, I could I'm going to bring it because I got good quality wheat here, or maybe this load or what I think the quality isn't one. I might get docked here. Maybe it's no difference between the So elevator does matter in the east. As you move west, I'm less familiar on the marketing side, but there's always nuances in terms of testing. And wheat is kind of unique. There's grading in corn and soybeans too, but because a lot of wheat is not going to be for ethanol plant or for fed to cattle. A lot of it's for us, eventually be ground into flour and consumed. The quality is a big part because it's usually direct consumable. So that's a little bit different where you need to understand grading and what they're grading and difference in the elevators that might be a little bit harder than others, or dock for certain things more than others. So there's as far as I know, there's no requirement that you like a docking schedule. It's probably some industry competition, but you have to dock this much for if you're 0.5% protein under. They kind of get us set that. Well, the advantage we have here in the east is all of our mills. We have 5 flour mills in Nebraska that actually use up 50% of the wheat we grow in Nebraska.
Really?
So you're talking almost 38 million bushels produced this last year in Nebraska, and they're using about 16 of it, about half of it. Half of the wheat here in Nebraska stays here. The other half is exported largely to Japan, Mexico, the Philippines, South Korea, and Taiwan. But we currently have 75 elevators that take it. Again, we have milling facilities here in Lincoln, Omaha, Crete, and I think another location. So all the mills are in the east, yet most of the wheat's out west. Wheat in Nebraska is interesting. Some stays here in Nebraska, and a lot of stuff in the Panhandle goes out to the Pacific Northwest.
Oh, really?
Out to Oregon, Washington, then over to if you look at our trading partners.
Oh, sure.
They're largely, Japan, Philippines, South Korea, and Taiwan. That makes sense.
So are they putting that on trains out west? And
so there's 2 specific Class 1 railroads that Nebraska wheat goes out on, and that's the Burlington Northern Santa Fe and the Union Pacific.
Okay.
So luckily we have a robust rail industry in Nebraska because of where we sit in the country, and so that's in our advantage. But but a little weaker on getting stuff down the Mississippi and not the direction where U.S. has been traded historically. But I always like to share how much that we get to use domestically here. Not to mention, I think Royce with the Wheat Board shared with me, we have 7 wholesale bakeries in Nebraska as well.
Really?
That are using that ground flour to make large-scale production of bread, cookies, tortilla, and cereal. So,
really?
Yeah. So,
I did not even know we had 5 mills here in Nebraska.
That's a very interesting thing.
So, I think that's always fun. A crop you grow here in Nebraska likely could be something that you might eat yourself.
Sure.
I've talked to a lot of growers lately at that Nebraska Seed Improvement Conference last week. Where a couple farmers I talked to, they've bought them and their spouse have bought tabletop mills.
Yeah.
So they essentially keep some of the wheat themselves, grind it for themselves, and have their own, homemade flour, which I think is even more neat to have that connection to. Just like you have an apple orchard. Everybody used to have fruit trees on a farm because it was part of homestead requirements.
Sure.
A lot of those fruit trees are long gone, but I think it's fun for wheat where it's something you can keep and use yourself too. So
that's really cool.
There's a lot of interest in smaller milling operations. If you think, there used to be mills in every town on every
No, I
river
can
if you
imagine.
think about it longer ago. And so I love that people are interested in that small scale production. I've had a group ask about in between, not just for you personally, but scaling up a little bit in between if
Sure.
I wanted to do small scale business. And then you get into what variety to grow. Just like anything, there's differences
Sure.
in end use quality
Sure.
in varieties that you buy.
That's really interesting. Yeah, I didn't realize that. So I'm thinking about, like, obviously all the pieces from kind of growing to eventually taking it to the mill to eventually, to your end products, your crackers or whatever. So in Nebraska, obviously with the decline of wheat production historically from when the 50s we were talking about earlier, and obviously mills dropped off, and so is there, when you mentioned it was like 70, 80 locations now are taking
for elevators. Yep.
on the elevator side.
Yep.
Are you seeing like an increase in elevator like reception of that, or is that kind of stable, or is it decreasing? And again, just kind of thinking about it. Obviously it's market driven. I get that. And that's
Sure.
why all this stuff is so interconnected.
Yeah.
And that's why I was kind of curious when you were talking about that
Yeah,
earlier.
I would say a lot of the shift you got to remember a lot of co-ops and elevators are fairly regional now.
Sure.
Meaning there's been lots of mergers
yeah.
in my lifetime.
Sure.
And so they have pretty big footprints, and it might be one elevator out of their multiple locations. They only take it at one.
Yeah. Okay.
Which makes sense, from
Yeah.
space. If you're going to allocate a whole
Sure.
bin and it only is a
Yep.
quarter full with wheat and it could have been full of corn, you have
Sure.
to start making those decisions.
Yep.
But I would say who takes wheat's been fairly stable in the
Okay.
last decade. A lot of that consolidation and reduction in where wheat was done. Same thing with grain sorghum.
Sure.
Here in east central Nebraska, used to be a lot of people take milo or grain sorghum, and there's not anymore either. It's kind of chicken and the egg. If there's not a lot of production,
Well,
they don't want to
yeah.
invest. But then if there's no elevator, people don't want to plant it.
Yeah.
I would love
Yeah.
some type of grant or investment. Actually, a lot of government support, including I get myself, comes directly to me from USDA, right? For example, the current situation, if there was some grant or program on some of these crops to say, hey, co-op will offer you something if you open up one in northeast Nebraska in a big gap that we don't have.
Yeah.
I think that would really change the game more so because that market piece I said, you should start with.
Yep.
Not end
yeah.
with.
Absolutely.
Is really critical. So, but I think, there's infrastructure challenges there, and we have to, as a society, talk about, what's our priorities in society, where we're going to
Correct.
allocate our limited, tax dollars or grants or private industry investment
Yep.
in things. And so, personally, I would love to see that. I think that would help, especially for other specialty crops. That's usually the biggest
Yeah.
barrier is where you're going to, sunflowers, for example. I want to grow sunflowers after
Yeah.
wheat, which you can do, double crop, probably one of the better options, or milo. Sunflowers, for example, you got to haul that to Kansas
Sure.
or Colorado or up to the Dakotas. So here in the East, you can do it. It's a really good crop. I know a farmer down in Jefferson County who's been done that for a long time, but that's a long ways to.
I was going to say you can go dove hunting.
Yeah,
I was
a long ways to bring that. So,
yeah.
But market
Yeah.
development's tough and investment to create that infrastructure. It's a lot easier just to
Yeah.
support the current infrastructure.
Well,
so.
and that's kind of where I was going to get at, because we have our Department of Energy project we're wrapping up out in Hayes Center and that area of the state, and we have some other sites across the state, but it's all around switchgrass and kind of taking marginal acres out of production, put them into switchgrass. And so part of that conversation was, a market for switchgrass production for, particularly on the ethanol side of things.
Yep.
Well, the plants can basically be retrofitted to handle that. The process for processing between that and corn are different, obviously, a little more intensive. But again, the trucking distance is the question. So if you have places that don't have that set up right now, that's obviously a barrier.
Yeah.
And so that was one of my postdoc, is another paper we're working on, is actually to map that out of what are the potential acres that could be put into that. And then where are the locations where you would need to ship it to, or truck it to, I should say, not ship it to, truck it to. And the question simply then is does it make economic sense from that economic model to do that or not? And ultimately, if you can make it that case that it is economically viable, then people are obviously more likely to do it. Yeah. So it's just a matter of kind of getting those equations to work out in a way it's, beneficial to the producer, not having to take and truck it, hours and hours and hours away. So.
Yeah. I think there's been a lot of discussion in the other commodities in corn and soybeans with where we've sat with lack of trade and soybeans, for example, coming to a standstill this past year with soybeans. And luckily, in Nebraska, they opened 2 new crush plants.
Yeah.
So there's continued talk among, farmers circles I'm in, cross crops of, how domestically are we create an industry that's more self-sustaining, where we use more of what we grow, where we're not as reliant on exporting our crop for profitability. And, at least in Nebraska, it's like I said, a cool fact, we're using 50%, but, is there opportunities for smaller mills or small businesses to start up maybe specialty, add that to your farm. Maybe you're going to, get into that industry where you're going to grind and process some of the wheat yourself and add that as a business. But that's a whole nother can of worms, right? To add that, just like talked to a cattle producer that wants to do calf to finish, where he's doing that whole process and selling the meat. But then you have all the investment and grants and process of, slaughtering your own and processing and marketing versus.
But if you get that worked out, it can work. And I think that's the thing really, when we started this podcast, one of the things I've always been passionate about was driving innovation around new ideas and new strategies and new business models that could be created because of some of these discussions like this. You just never know. And it could be, and I hear stories all the time of like, well, we tried this out and this has been really successful for us. And it's just those little niche things that, and again, it doesn't mean you have to convert your entire operation. It's simply diversifying your financial portfolio and it doesn't have to be dramatic, just little pieces here and there that could then help and say, oh, well, hey, now I'm having a lot of traction here. This isn't something else I could really invest my time into. But like you said, there are barriers there, and there's obviously programs, though, that can help people and getting the consultation from individuals like yourself and others that can, help people along. There's resources out there. You don't have to feel like you're on an island with any of this stuff. So,
and I know from cost share standpoint, both Pheasants Forever, USDA, historically Practical Farmers Iowa, the list goes on.
Yeah.
There's been opportunities to get some financial support to incorporate small grains into the rotation.
Sure.
I know when I was with NRCS, we were trying to actually get that increase. South Dakota had a different practice than Nebraska, and it was almost $50 an acre to add wheat into the rotation within one of the practices, and so we were trying to get that added. So I don't know where that stands, but that was going to be a big difference over the $7 or $12 that it currently was. And that really helps with that entry barrier. If you think a lot about those support programs, it's to help get people started. It's like beginning farmer loans.
Oh, yeah.
In this case, you're not a beginning farmer maybe because you've been farming for 20 years. You've just never done wheat.
Correct.
But it doesn't mean that you're not new to the crop. And so I really like programs that help reduce risk and allow people to enter into something, try something with a little less financial risk. So besides the agronomics, I think it's important for people to talk to different conservation partners, other nonprofit, other entities that might have some options there to help with getting started. And then again, just surrounding yourself with experts. Just, being selfish, but 10 years with Extension, it's a really good place to start. So even if your local Extension educator doesn't know the answer, I guarantee you they can find somebody to connect you with.
Correct.
So even if they don't know the answer, so for wheat, guess what? A lot of my fellow educators referred calls to me from other counties on wheat.
Sure.
And I did the same thing. If there was an irrigation technology question, I gave it to Steve Melvin. I gave it to Aaron Nygren. I gave it to one of our specialists on campus, right?
Sure, yeah.
Same thing, wildlife questions, send them to you. So it is about who you know, and a good place to start. I always just a plug for local Extension is start with them and let them leverage their connections for you. Same thing, start with who you might think on the marketing side or who you work for a seed company. So surround yourself with as many many talented people as you can. That's high tide floats all boats.
That's true.
Yeah, that's extremely well said. And because there's a lot of organizations out there that, including Pheasants Forever, that want to see crop diversity come back into our landscapes, right?
Yeah.
It's not only going to benefit that producer and their field, but it's also going to benefit the local wildlife and a variety of other ecosystem services. So extremely well said.
Yeah, no, that's really good. Yeah.
So with that, before we sign off, is there anything else that you want to touch on or any stories from growing wheat yourself that you need to share before wrapping it up?
I can just, working with family, I'd say the hardest people to convince to do something new is probably going to be internal to your farm operation. It's convincing your dad, your brother.
Sure.
For me, it was convincing my brother to add wheat, and he's an ag economist by training.
Oh, okay.
So he's the number cruncher already.
Oh, sure.
And so he said, yeah, we can start this on just 10 acres. And I said, sure, let's do it. And so that was the window. And now, he put it on his own rented farm. We're continuing to keep it in our rotation. So he's seen the numbers.
That's really
And
cool.
after, I think 9 years with cover crops and 4 wheat crops on our farm, we're continuing down that road because we've seen benefits both in terms of soil health, between a whole bunch of different things, between crop rotation, no-till, biosolids, manure, wheat. We've increased organic matter on our field from 2.5% to 4% since we bought it in 2008.
Wow.
So in terms of soil health, there's that. In terms of economics, from weed pressure, having wheat and cover crops in the rotation has really helped us as a part of our weed management program with water hemp. So we see value there. So there's a lot of little benefits that add up to a lot. And sometimes it's really hard to put a dollar amount on some of those benefits. Try to, so when you pencil things out, add those little things. And then there's quality of life. I know some producers just enjoy one crop more than another.
Sure.
And they just like growing wheat, for example, once they start. And so, you got to enjoy what you do for your job or your business. And then, distributional workload's another. I've had some farmers say, hey, I have less corn and soybeans I got to plant when it's wet in the spring because I already got that wheat in.
Yeah.
And so that shifts workload. The other one's cash flow that we don't think about. When do you sell your wheat? Well, if you sell it right out of the field, it's going to be in July.
Sure.
If your corn and soybeans, when does your profit come in?
Yeah.
Well, unless you have it sitting in the bin and you're which you might be and hauling it out all year round, but it can help with cash flow in some operations. Yep. So there's a lot of things to talk to, give, I guess, for people listening, feel free to, if you're especially in Eastern Nebraska and have some of the, questions we talked about today, give me a call.
Sure.
Talk to Nebraska Extension. We have specialists, and again, would love to chat with you. And again, it's something that we added to our operation, my brother and I, and we're continuing down this road and excited about it. So now the biggest debate is, he works for private industry and I work for UNL, and both have wheat varieties. And so I'm going to win out because I'm the wheat agronomist. But so those are fun debates to have too, right? All in good fun.
Sure, yeah.
And not that you need something else added to your plate, but maybe a step-by-step guide on how to convince family members would be another good publication for you to put out.
That was the question I was going to end on. Was I had an individual, this is about a year ago, and he asked me, he said, how do I talk to my family members, particularly my dad, about, in that case, conservation programs, and kind of asking, some of the questions of why do we keep doing what we're doing? And I said, I don't really necessarily have a clear answer for you. However, I would just ask a lot of why questions, and recognize it takes time. We all are humans. We all don't like change. That's just the reality of it. If it works, and it has been working, we're pretty apt to not want to change. Yep. But, today's talk was an illustration of, you start thinking about it, start asking questions, and then you start asking some of those, reliable resources out there like yourself and others in Extension, and say, are there opportunities here? And can we maybe do something a little different? And again, it's that entry level. I just want to kind of reemphasize that. It doesn't mean you have to go out and take and convert your entire operation over, or a fifth of your fields you were referring to earlier. Again, start small, kind of work your way into it.
Yep.
So.
Well, I really had fun talking with you guys this morning. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes, sir. Thanks for joining us, and thanks for listening, everybody.
Are you enjoying the Wild Ag Podcast? You or your organization can sponsor upcoming episodes that bring important information to listeners just like you. To learn more, visit our website, go.unl.edu/wildag.
Wild Ag is part of the Natural Resources University Podcast Network. If you enjoy this podcast, please leave us a review so others can find us and tune in.
And we want to hear from you. You can submit questions or topic suggestions to us at wildagpodcast@gmail.com. That's WILDAG podcast@gmail.com. Thanks for listening.